So, for our next segment, we are wading into a pretty contentious topic. And it's one that, I think Nathan and I are both nervous to tackle because it's challenging to get right. And there's probably no great answer, regardless of how effectively you think through it. But I think, it's core to the functioning and the purpose of our show that we talk to you guys about this and to try to unpack it a little bit. So specifically, we're talking about the current war, as it has been described, even by the parties involved, between Israel and Hamas in Palestine.
Yeah. And there are probably going to be some emotions in this segment because this is an emotional segment. This is an emotional thing that's happening. And one of the things that I've been really disappointed about is that there have been a lot of people whose political opinion I respect, whose solution to this has just been to not talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why they're not talking about it is because this is a controversial issue. This is a contentious issue. And this is an issue in which no matter what you say, even if you say what should be the most obvious thing in the world, there's going to be a large number of people that are going to get on to descend upon you.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that should not fucking matter because political commentators have a responsibility to use their platforms to talk about potentially controversial issues, talk about potentially contentious issues, because your viewers do deserve to know what is going on. Now, you do want to make sure that you are presenting the facts before giving commentary, and that's what we're going to try our best to do.
Mm-hmm.
You do want to make sure that you are not letting your emotions get in the way of potential facts, which there is actually a story in this in which for a little bit I kind of jumped the gun in believing something before looking at it a little bit more and realizing that the answer was anything but verified.
Yeah.
Which we'll get to.
Yeah.
But just understand we are doing this because I know that we don't have a huge following, but we do have a consistent following.
Mm-hmm.
And you all deserve to know what is going on. And you all deserve to know where we stand on this.
Yeah. One kind of disclaimer I do want to make about the facts, and I think it's implied in what you were saying, Nathan, is that this is a rapidly evolving situation.
Yeah.
And not only is what is happening on the ground evolving, but our understanding of it is changing really rapidly. Like the reporting is coming out quickly, and there are a lot of unknowns on the ground. I think ultimately we have to caveat many of the facts that we present with the fact that they're still evolving. And ultimately we may, in the future, as we reflect, not just this podcast, but as the world reflects on the facts of how all of this unfolded, they may differ from how it appeared on the ground at the time. And so, ultimately, much of this is subject to change. The things that aren't subject to change are that human lives are valuable, that civilians have to be protected, and that, there is no excuse for indiscriminate killing of innocent people.
Regardless of where they were born or what their government is doing or what people that look like them are doing.
Yep. Those things don't change.
And I think that that's something that really needs to be said on the offset. So, to start out, this all started with a massive attack that was carried out by Hamas. Now, Hamas is basically this authoritarian governing group that took control of Palestine decades ago.
Yep.
And is partially partially a governing group and partially just a straight up terrorist group.
Yes. Yeah.
And we've actually seen similar patterns like this before on smaller scales.
Yeah.
Because what usually happens is where Israel will take some type of action or make some type of policy that further discriminates against Palestinians. Because as it stands, there's about 50 laws on the books in Israel that directly classify Palestinians as second-class citizens. Like that is a fact. They are not given equal rights within Israel. And prior to this conflict, Gaza has been treated basically as an open-air prison. And people in the West Bank have continued to lose their houses to settlers from Israel. That has been happening. That is just a fact. That has been happening. So what led to this was there was some potential concerns over conflicts between settlers in the West Bank, which if you're unfamiliar with the region, you have the Gaza Strip, which is a very narrow strip, which is in the eastern region of Israel. So then you have the West Bank, which is obviously on the western part of Israel and borders Jordan. Now, there have always been efforts by Israel to push Palestinians out of homes within the West Bank and put Israeli settlers in there.
Yeah, because this is a contended region. Neither side
this
has
is
settled on it being like belonging to one nation.
Yeah, exactly. So normally it's a policies change. In the past it's been a policy change that has then led to a violent attack by Hamas, which has then led to a response from Israel, which is never proportionate. In this case, it was a crime of opportunity. So because Israel took took troops from the border of Gaza to the Western Bank, there was an opening for Hamas to come in, and they wreaked havoc.
Yeah.
There's no other way of saying. This was a brutal attack on Israeli civilians in which men, women, and children were killed, and the death toll was over 1,000.
Yeah.
And that is unequivocally immoral, disgusting, and unjustifiable.
Yeah.
Regardless of the ways in which Palestinians are treated by the Israeli government, and there are very, very legitimate criticisms that we have talked about on the pod, collective punishment by targeting civilians is never justified.
Yeah.
Ever. And I don't give a shit what that government did. Direct targeting on civilians is never justified. Collective punishment on civilians is never justified.
Yeah.
So anybody on the Palestinian side, and I have seen some activists make this argument who try to say, this is just them taking back their land from Jewish settlers. Or this is, I saw one person basically say, "Oh, so your sympathy with Palestine ends when they start being violent? What did you think we meant by desettlement? Not fucking this."
Yeah, exactly.
All right?
Yeah.
Not this. Not the indiscriminate targeting of women and children.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are those children really guilty of that?
Exactly.
Are they?
Yeah.
Like, are all Jewish civilians in Israel guilty of that? No, they are not. These are the actions of the government. And this is something that we've said on this pod before. All right? You do have to separate criticisms of a people from criticisms of the government that governs those people. You have to separate that out.
Yeah. Yeah, the attack from Hamas was absolutely brutal. An estimated 1,400 people killed, 3,400 people injured in Israel, um, launching over 2,000 rockets at South and Central Israel. Um, Hamas militants like charging in on motorcycles, um, on paragliders, boats. Like this was a large scale, multi thousand militant assault on this region of Israel, including attacking Jewish settlers, killing like slaughtering small towns and kibbutzes, like attacking a music festival that was in the desert and killing hundreds of people, as well as specifically their intent was to not only kill as many people as possible, which we now know from documents and plans found on the bodies of Hamas militants that died in the area, but they also intended to gain leverage over Israel by kidnapping and taking hostages, which are estimated to be about 200 to 250 hostages that were taken by Hamas and then are being they think that are being held in Gaza.
Yeah.
Um, and like
And
this was like this attack was, we now know, like clearly intended to terrorize the people of Israel. This attack is replete with war crimes by a terrorist organization. Their goal was to quote, like this is quoting from planning documents found on Hamas soldiers' bodies, to quote, kill as many people as possible and to seize hostages as well as surrounding schools in order to kill and kidnap Israeli children.
unforgivable.
Absolutely unforgivable.
Unforgivable, unjustifiable. I don't care what the government of those civilians did.
Yeah.
Unjustifiable.
Yeah.
And
Senator, like one thing that I think puts this in perspective, Senator Jimmy Raskin of Maryland released a statement calling this, quote, the most murderous assault on Jewish civilians since the Holocaust. And to put it in perspective, this is the equivalent relative to the population of Israel, like, you know, on a proportionate, you know, this is proportionally equivalent to a dozen 9/11 attacks.
yeah. And I think it's also important to note that one of the things that does make conversations about the Israel Palestine conflict difficult is almost always when there's a flare up of conflicts between
Yeah.
Israel and Palestine, we see a sharp increase of hate crimes against Jewish people and hate crimes against Muslim people
Yeah.
all around the world.
Yeah.
And those should be condemned.
Of
A
course.
Jewish person in Australia has nothing to do with the Israeli government.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Which is why it is also disgusting that in Australia, there were protests from people who were chanting, fuck the Jews and gas the
Jesus.
Jews.
Holy fucking shit.
And that should also be unequivocally condemned.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what should also be unequivocally condemned is the deliberate targeting of civilians in response to this attack by the Israeli government.
Yeah. To be clear, it is apparent that that the effect on civilians is deliberate. It's hard to
Yes.
imagine that it's otherwise because
Well, they admitted it. So, an Israeli army spokesman, Daniel Hagri, openly admitted that the purpose of the heavy bombardment is, quote, on damage, not accuracy. And on October 11th, so almost about a week ago, since we recorded this, the Israel army boasted that 6,000 bombs weighing a combined 4,000 tons had been dropped on Gaza. They boasted about it. They bragged about it after after the army spokesman said that the focus is on damage and not accuracy. Which that language sounds a hell of a lot like the language that Hamas used to justify the initial attack.
Yeah. Especially
damage and not accuracy.
And damage and not accuracy. It's not like they're bombing, a rural area. It's not like they're bombing the middle of Montana, where damage but not accuracy can take out fences and not people. Like, the Gaza Strip is one of the most densely populated places on Earth.
Yeah.
2.2 million people squeezed into 140 square miles. It's like the size of like Philadelphia with 2.2 million people in it. It's if you drop a bomb inaccurately there, you kill civilians. There's no way around it.
Yeah. Like, Gaza's smaller than Rhode Island.
Yeah.
The Gaza Strip is smaller than Rhode Island. And also, to put into perspective the number of bombs, which again, that is an old number. That is a number from a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that 6,000 number, that is a number from a week ago. To put that into perspective, that is equivalent or nearly equivalent to the amount of bombs dropped in Afghanistan by NATO in 1 year.
Yeah. Jeez. So in response, we saw a quick mobilization by Israeli forces. Again, like, this was an incredible intelligence failure on not anticipating, not preventing this attack. And their military quickly mobilized after the attack had subsided. And Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, declared that, quote, Israel is at war. And they have launched, fighter jets, like bombing 130 targets. And I think this was a week ago as well in the Gaza Strip. And the defense minister ordered a complete siege of Gaza, cutting off electricity, blocking fuel, food from entering the area, which is, like, we'll talk through a bit of the humanitarian implications here, but, Gaza is already one of the most heavily blockaded places on Earth with, I think nearly 80% of the population lacking clean drinking water on a good day. And so the Israeli military has also mobilized about 300,000 reserves. And to Nathan's point, in the first week, dropped 6,000 bombs on the area.
And there are 2.2 million people that live in Gaza.
Yeah.
Half of which are children 15 or under.
Yeah. Yep.
Half.
A child can't be a terrorist.
You can't. Yeah. You cannot tell me that is justified. You cannot tell me that it is okay to indiscriminately bomb children.
Yeah.
You cannot tell me that. You cannot make that argument. All right. That's like, that is such a heinous belief. And the fact that the position in American politics is not, don't bomb civilians. The fact that that's not the position, the fact that trying to call for a ceasefire so that civilians are no longer being bombed, the fact that that is not a position just speaks to the fundamental failing moral fiber of our government. The fact that it is considered controversial, the fact that only the most progressive members of the House called for a ceasefire, tried to bring a resolution to call for a ceasefire, the fact that only 13 members of Congress issued a 2-page resolution to urge the Biden administration to immediately call for and facilitate de-escalation and a ceasefire to urgently end the violence, as well as the need to, quote, prominently send and facilitate the entry of humanitarian assistance into Gaza. And they were being dragged through the mud for that? They were being criticized for that?
Yeah.
When 6,000 bombs, which at this point, it's definitely been more. At this point, that was a week ago.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, the latest casualty numbers at this point that I've seen have been more than 2,300 Palestinians, and that's as of yesterday, which there's sure to have been more today.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah. And to be clear, like, Israel has a right and an obligation to its people to defend
100%.
itself,
100%.
and to go after Hamas, like, take it out root and stem, and, like, destroy this terrorist organization. But it just cannot come at the cost of the collateral damage of the people of Gaza.
Yeah.
No matter how difficult that is. Those two, like, those are both moral requirements.
Yeah.
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 And
And that should not be a controversial thing to say.
yeah. And Israel has attempted to warn the people of Palestine, of northern Gaza, to move to like a safer territory in Gaza. So they've warned about 1 million Palestinians to flee to the south of Gaza to avoid the most significant likely ground invasion into the northern part of the strip. The problem here, unfortunately, is that, well, there's a bunch of problems. One is that while hundreds of thousands of people have fled, this is already worsening their incredibly difficult circumstances, right? They don't have the food or the fuel or the water or the means to flee and provide for their families and their children at the same time. And so, like, these are, refugees. And at the same time, moving millions of people is puts like a strain on the whole region, and they're fleeing south to a place called Khan Yunis, whose population has already gone from 400,000 to more than 1 million, so more than doubling the population in the last 2 weeks. But at the same time, the south is not significantly safer. Like, the South Gaza area is still getting struck with bombs, and women and children are still being killed as they flee to the south in an attempt to evacuate and follow the guidance of the Israeli government. So literally, like, just on Monday night, more than 100 people were killed after this, southern safe haven in Gaza was struck. And there's just no further southern place to go. It borders on Egypt, and the border with Egypt, the crossing point, is closed to the refugees from Gaza. So there is just, like, this attempt to save the people of Gaza by getting them to flee rings hollow.
Yeah. Well, they even said it themselves that they don't care about accuracy, they care about damage.
Mm-hmm.
All right? Hell, they're hitting refugee camps. The Jablia refugee camp, which I probably said that wrong, I apologize. Which has a population of 35,000, has been bombed several times, 2 of which are now known as the Trinus and Sika massacres, where, like, dozens of people who are in refugee camps, which are supposed to be safe havens, have been bombed. I mean, schools are being bombed. Houses are being bombed. Families are being are being completely taken out. The Palestinian health minister has said that one Palestinian, this is according to Al Jazeera, the Palestinian health minister has said that one Palestinian has been killed in Gaza every 5 minutes in the current attacks, and at least 45 three-generation families have been killed, wiped from the civil registry, the ministry added. They're purposely targeting civilians. This is collective punishment for the actions of Hamas. And if we can agree, which we all should agree, that the actions by Hamas were collective punishment against Israel for the actions that Israel has taken against Palestinians, If we can agree that that is wrong, that you cannot collectively punish civilians, that Hamas was wrong to collectively punish civilians, you have to also agree that the collective punishment of Palestinians is just as immoral.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so far, more widespread.
Yeah. And to be fair, the interpretation that Hamas was going after Israel specifically as a response to, like, the kind of apartheid state that they're facing is like the most generous interpretation of Hamas's motivations, which we know are to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. So, like, so,
Yeah.
but yes, but your point is exactly right. It's 100% on, which is just life has value, and collective punishment, the indiscriminate killing of civilians, is wrong no matter who's doing it.
Yeah. And the Human Rights Watch has also confirmed that white phosphorus is being used in Gaza, which is a chemical weapon that is illegal. You cannot tell me that you are carrying out a war against a terrorist group if you are dumping chemical weapons onto civilians. You just can't. You cannot do that.
Yeah.
And fuck, what is the Biden administration doing? The State Department sent out a memo to its diplomats, specifically telling them, don't use phrases like de-escalation or an end to violence or ceasefire or end to violence / bloodshed or restoring calm. The Biden administration is directly telling its diplomats not to try to de-escalate, not to try to push for a ceasefire, not to try to push for an end to the violence. The Biden administration is a fucking failure of leadership. The easiest thing anybody should ever be able to do is to say that the deliberate attack of civilians is wrong, and we will not support that. And only 13 members of the House of Representatives are saying that. Only 13 members of the House of Representatives. And the saddest part is, this really does show you how little that we have learned from 9/11. I want to talk about one response to the calls for ceasefire, the resolution for the ceasefire that I think is really telling. All right. So this is from Jake Alchencloss. I think that I have no idea how you say that name. I do apologize. Who is a Democratic representative from Massachusetts. On Twitter, he wrote, quote, "Calls for de-escalation, even if well-meaning, are premature. Israel needs the military latitude to reestablish deterrence and root out the nodes of terrorism. Israel did not ask America to de-escalate on September 12th, 2001. And you know what? Israel fucking should have. Yeah. The whole world fucking should have.
Mm-hmm.
You're really using that as an example for not de-escalating? Because you know what 9/11 led to? 9/11 led to 2 wars. One of which was a country that had nothing to do with it whatsoever. One of which was against a country that hid the people that did it. 2 wars that lasted decades, that destroyed the American economy, that cost thousands of American lives and hundreds of thousands of civilian lives. And you're using that as an example of what you're using that as your example?
Yeah.
Seriously? We've learned nothing about 9/11. All right? Look, after 9/11 happened, Osama bin Laden needed to be hunted down and killed. You will never hear me say say otherwise. All right? He should have been hunted down and he should have been killed. Absolutely. But we did not need to invade entire countries and start wars killing thousands of civilians in order to do it. It needs to be more strategic. And you might say, well, that would have taken too long. Seriously? We were in those wars for 2 decades.
Yeah.
You cannot tell me that, that to try to be more precise on it, that precision and intelligence, to try to root out the actual people that did it, you can't tell me that that is somehow the more difficult option. You can't tell me that. So we've learned nothing from 9/11. We've learned nothing. Israel is going to continue to collectively punish the people of Palestine, the people of Gaza, for the actions of a terrorist group that was, again, what Hamas did was completely unjustified. But meanwhile, the United States is going to watch and cheer because we have learned nothing about our history. We have learned nothing from our history. And this is the weakest Joe Biden has ever been. This is the most disappointed I have ever been with Joe Biden. You cannot support this. Earlier I talked about the bombing of that refugee camp. I want to read you some accounts from that. In case you think that this is justified, in case you think, well, this is just collateral damage. A 31-year-old told Al Jazeera, witnessing it, "I thought that the camp would be the safer option because it was so full of people, and I thought it wouldn't be targeted by Israeli planes. I saw terrifying scenes of dismembered bodies, men, women, and children. I couldn't bear it. I broke down." There was another woman who was on the scene who ran from her home searching for her 3 sons who were in the market at the time of one of the explosions. She found one of her sons trying to give first aid to one of his friends who was badly injured. She said, "I tried to comfort him, but Muhammad kept saying, 'Let me go. I want to go with Yusuf.' I cried. There was so much blood. Yusuf was bleeding so much." She continued by saying, "I have never felt such intense fear. I didn't expect this bombing. Everyone in the camp is shell-shocked." Another person who witnessed it. "The camp is still reeling from the Tunis massacre. My family is in shock. We lost our friends, our neighbors, the beautiful memories we shared together. They wiped out everything. The buildings were all destroyed. Do the Israelis think that this destruction will displace us again? I will never leave my home. My children and I are staying here." The sad part is, though, there might not be a home for them. When Israel is done, there might be nothing left. And if the United States keeps cheering this on, keeps letting this happen, refusing to say anything about it, when it takes the so-called extreme left to be able to say the most obvious thing in the world, which is don't bomb civilians, this will continue to happen. Children will continue to die. Innocents will continue to have their lives, their homes destroyed. If we cannot agree on the basic premise that no targeting of civilians, no matter who those civilians are, no matter what their government did, no matter where those civilians were born, if we can't agree on the basic premise that you cannot do that, that is off limits, if we cannot agree on that, then we have truly lost our moral fiber. We have truly lost our humanity. We need some empathy. We need a ceasefire. We need this violence to end. Punish the sons of bitches that carried out the initial strike, the Hamas individuals that carried out the initial strike. Find them, punish them, but stop killing civilians.